And I'm sorry, therefore, in this context, business has been complicit in the destruction of the economy. It's the political correctness, it's a lack of understanding of how to drive democratic accountability so that the voice of business is not isolated.
Why has big business in South Africa failed to push back against hostile government policy? I posed this question to Songezo Zibi in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. If you enjoyed this analysis, you might want to check out the full-length interview that's linked in the description below. Enjoy. I mean, I think this kind of goes back to one of your other talking points, Songezo, which is that many people in the professional class seem to be a bit disengaged from politics and kind of social activism. Why do you think that is? And how can we start to stir them out of their slumber?
I think there are three reasons in the main, and I'll say them quickly. The first one is that we've never really had democratization as a project. We had freedom, political freedom as a project, but not democratization, which is where a lot more people feel a greater sense of responsibility for the republic and what happens to it. So that's one of the reasons we formed Rivonia Circle, because that's what we want to provoke. The second reason is that people get terribly intimidated, and I think I can surmise that a lot of people who will watch this are in companies. They know how companies get intimidated the moment they say something that is even remotely honest. What tends to happen is that the companies themselves don't like their employees speaking out as citizens. So there has been an inadvertent collaboration between the ANC and its sensitivities as the governing party and the complicity of companies and other employers, which have had that chilling effect on people and made them not to speak. That's the second thing. The last one is because of the first two. A lot of people think that politics is something that comes with a special anointing. It's not. When you have a sense of national duty, it becomes your responsibility to find like-minded people in a democracy to make sure that the idea that we have prevails. And I think that sense is not there. Now, how do we get them back into action? We use this crisis, David. I think the people that have always been able to buy their way out of the incapacities of the state can't anymore, because there's no electricity, there's no water, and so you can't run away. The question is, what do you do with that crisis? I think this is ripe for organizing. This is ripe for the production of innovative ideas and even taking existing ideas and using them as political issues going forward. And lastly, this is the right time for fresh leadership, because survey after survey that we do at Rivonia Circle, people want new, more energetic leadership. And therefore, there is an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it speaks also to the broad role of business in society collectively. If you think of organized business, particularly big business, and you were inside the belly of the beast for a number of years there. And, I think that this lack of confidence, this equivocation, I think often plays into the ANC government's hands, that basically a policy like expropriation without compensation gets put on the table. Business says, okay, well, let's deal with this constructively and engage with government. Maybe you end up with a watered down version of NHI or EWC or prescribed assets. But ultimately what happens there is you end up reinforcing the ideological agenda of the government, which is inimical to growth and development. And so I've argued on this show and other platforms that business maybe needs to move away from the consensus-seeking approach with government and take on more of a transactional approach to negotiate on policy rather than just to reinforce and reproduce the government's agenda. What do you say to that?
Actually, business needs to be bolder. So the problem with the business sector is that it feels that it needs to stay out of politics. And so there are very few companies that fund political parties and fund political campaigns. It is up to the private family wealth philanthropies to fund civil society, because businesses are being politically correct and not wanting to fund organizations that agitate. And yet it is those organizations that have hit the streets, protested and made sure that Zuma does not do as much damage as it did. And so there is a need for a change in orientation in business as part of that democratization project that I was talking about, because in other countries, businesses fund political ideas they agree with. And it's time that business takes that fundamental step, because otherwise you have this vacuum where business wants to be in the good graces of people who are misgoverning. And because of that, they are failing to support initiatives that are going to make things better. It doesn't work. The whole consensus building mechanism between the national government and business is premised on national stakeholder relationships, which sometimes are incestuous for various reasons, because there's cross-pollination between the party and certain board members and that sort of thing. It is under these circumstances, David, that now local government has collapsed because nobody has been paying attention to it. Nobody has been paying attention to it. Yet every business in this economy is in a locality. Now, I'll give you a very quick example about any courier company out there. With load shedding, it means they don't make their delivery targets per day. Facing their margins are being further squeezed by high energy costs, by diesel, and the roads are terrible. And so they pay more for breakdowns and that sort of thing. I'm sure those margins are close to zero or negative margins. That's how, out of a lack of understanding of where the political failures is, you start killing the economy. And I'm sorry, therefore, in this context, business has been complicit in the destruction of the economy. It's the political correctness, it's a lack of understanding of how to drive democratic accountability so that the voice of business is not isolated as it has been now. And often people feel that they shouldn't speak because they don't have the legitimacy. The legitimacy is earned by supporting initiatives that people can see fight for their cause too, beyond charity, signing a check and giving it to the Solidarity Fund.
Yeah, I think CSI initiatives are a way for business to kind of provide cover for themselves and say, oh, look, we're doing our part by painting the fence at a primary school or something. But they're very meek when it comes to dealing with bad policy. I mean, I am encouraged to see the likes of Fani Titi, the CEO of Investec, Gareth Ackerman, the chairman of Pick and Pay, starting to raise some criticisms. I would say it's still rather timid at the moment. But, you know, I think the kind of robust criticism that we see, for example, from the Sibanye Stillwater CEO, Neil Froneman, I think is part of how you achieve results. And I think this idea of business leaders, real leaders make difficult calls and aren't afraid necessarily to alienate others. I think it doesn't mean that you must be aggressive, but you can be firm about defending your interests and the broader needs of the economy.
Now, I'm going to push you there, David. The ANC has known that no matter how frankly government speaks, ultimately they want to hurt them politically. It comes down to that. It's like any market, and politics is a market. If ultimately somebody is not going to hurt your bottom line in any way whatsoever, why would you pay attention to them? You don't. That's business's problem. And that's the difference between business in South Africa and business in more mature democracies. So I insist on this. It doesn't always have to be political parties that they fund, but the reason business becomes isolated and gets ignored by the people is because there's somebody who sits on boards of philanthropies. I know, David, that were it not for those often overseas philanthropies, there would be no civil society in South Africa because business is trying to be politically correct. It can't continue anymore. And the reason a lot more people are beginning to speak up as timidly as possible is because that conspiracy of silence has brought us where we are now. And they are still afraid. And they should not be afraid because in a democracy, fear produces dictatorship.
Thanks for watching. Let's hand over to you, our audience. What role do you think business should be playing in advocating for better policies in South Africa? Leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. Also, if you would like to watch the full-length discussion with Songezo Zibi, that's linked over here. You can also subscribe to my other channel. That's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.